Hi, everybody. How y'all doing? This has been amazing to watch. Okay, I want to start with a story. So it's about 15 years ago, and I'm in my office at the Second City in Chicago. It's a Friday, beginning of the summer, and I'm sort of picking up my stuff. And my son, Nick, is downstairs finishing his first week of improv class. All right, so here's what you need to know about Nick at the time. He was 10 years old. He was chubby. He has weird theater parents, so he's like this weird theater kid. And he gets bullied at school. But this week has been amazing, and he's having an incredible time. And we get in the car, and we're leaving the parking lot, and he says to me, "Dad, do you know what I love about improv?" I go, "No, buddy, what do you love about improv?" He says, "In improv, if you're nice and you're funny, you're popular." And that has stuck with me to this day. So I started at Second City in 1988. It was my first gig out of college, and I was a dishwasher, which is not as glamorous as it sounds. The back bar at the Second City in those days was filled with alcoholics and sociopaths. I'm not making this up. The other guy who got hired with me that very week was a guy named Jon Favreau, the film director, and we both had mullets. And there is photographic evidence in my wife's office at the Second City. I don't allow it to leave that office. So 88 at Second City. The cast included on the main stage Mike Myers, Bonnie Hunt, Joel Murray. The Second City ETC, our sister stage, Jane Lynch was in that company. Tim Meadows and Chris Farley just got hired in the touring company, and Farley was constantly getting in trouble for breaking things. And I don't know if you know how Second City is set up, but we do 2 acts of scripted content, and then a 3rd act that is improvised, where the actors are making it up. And it seems like magic when you get there. But then you work at Second City a little bit and you realize it's not magic at all. So I'm not going to bury the lead. Improvisation is yoga for your social skills. Okay? Improvisation is loud, noisy group mindfulness. Improvisation is a practice in being unpracticed, which is how we all walk through the world. And if that surprises you, it might not if you knew the origin story of the Second City, which starts in the 20s and 30s. On the south side of Chicago, there was a social worker by the name of Viola Spolin. And her job was to better assimilate the immigrant children coming into her care, as well as neighborhood children. So she created all these exercises, these games, that allowed the kids to communicate and collaborate and empathize. Many of the games were in silence or in gibberish, because the kids didn't always share language. And Viola's son, Paul Sills, was studying at the University of Chicago, and he loved these games, and he taught them to his friends, Mike Nichols, Elaine May, Barbara Harris, Alan Arkin, among others. And they formed the first improvisational theater in America called Compass Players in 1955. And by 1959, that turns into the Second City. All right, so fast forward to 1992, and I become the producer of the Second City. My first cast included Stephen Colbert, Steve Carell, and Amy Sedaris. I hired Tina Fey, Rachel Dratch, Keegan-Michael Key, Jason Sudeikis, Cecily Strong, A.D. Bryant. I am name dropping like crazy, but we all know that's why I'm here. I have a front row seat to seeing amazing performance. I have a front row seat to seeing how people can literally go on stage with nothing and come out with something incredible. If you fast forward then to 2015, I co-write a book called Yes And, about how we take our improvisational theater techniques into companies all over the world. And it does really well, and I'm on book tour, and I will never forget this. I'm at the Aspen Ideas Festival, and my wife Ann and I are delivering this workshop, interactive keynote workshop like today. And Walter Isaacson was there, who just wrote the Musk book, and he's coming up and talking to us, and Arianna Huffington is coming up and is like, "This is killing, it's great." And I get a text from my boss at Second City wondering why we were off like $250 on like some budget item. That and a series of other things led me to quit my job at Second City. The other things would be a midlife crisis. So I feel very indebted to the folks at Second City, because my boss at the time knew I was unhireable and said, "Why don't you stay for a year? We'll pay you as a consultant, and you can figure out a bridge out or a bridge back in." I'm like, "Okay, great." And so he moves me to like the best office I've ever had at Second City, right in the front on Wall Street. And I had a vacation plan. He's like, "Go on your vacation." And so I go just as my office, all my stuff is moved over and set up in this new office. I'm in Michigan, I'm putting gas in my car on vacation, and I get a text from one of my coworkers, Nate, who says, your office is on fire. Now, I work at Second City, so I assume this is a bit. It is not. The fancy Mexican restaurant right below Second City, right below my office, they had a grease fire that went straight up into my office and across the hall. The firefighters saved the theater. They could not save the offices. Basically, all my stuff was gone. So 27, 28 years of memories and other things. There's a happy ending to all this. So this was really a moment. I had just stepped down, like I was in this new world, I didn't know what I was gonna do. We got sent to these temporary offices that were truly, truly awful. I won't name the company, but it rhymes with Regis. Oh, I just said it's Regis. Sorry. I don't know if the company's terrible. What I know about this situation is that the receptionist, the shared receptionist, we got in trouble for laughing too much. It was literally anti-joy. I don't know if that's company policy, it was the policy here. And we're all cramped into offices, and I'm not with my crew, right? So the offices that got evacuated, that they sent us out on were, and then yes, I had written the book on Second City, working in businesses, but I came in as the storyteller, and I'd produced Second City for decades, and I was not necessarily the business guy. But I'm in these cramped offices with that team, and Steve Johnson, who runs the corporate division, says to me, okay, you were known for, when I was running the theater, creating a bunch of partnerships. So I developed a Second City guide to the opera with Renee Fleming. I developed a Second City dance show with Harvard Street Dance, and some of you might have seen our work with the Toronto Symphony. So that was a thing that I did. And he goes, what kind of collaborations would you do if you were doing that for the corporate folks? And any author who says they don't do this is lying. When you're on book tour, you go to the local bookstore to see if your book is there. And I would do that. And there was a book that was out at the time about improvisation and the art of negotiation. It was not very good. I'm sure the negotiation stuff was fine. He didn't really know a lot about improv. So I said to Steve, well, what if we, as experts in improvisation, partnered with a negotiation expert to develop a program? He goes, great, do it. So in my scientific mode, I Googled academic negotiation Chicago, and I just emailed the first 5 professors that came up. So 4 of them got back to me right away. They were all interested in doing this thing. And then the 5th, about a week later, got back to me, and his name was Eugene Caruso. He was at the University of Chicago. And he said, like, hey, I'm sorry I got back to you so late. Or if you're still interested in talking, do you want to come up for a meeting? It's like old Kelly would have been like, no, I'm good. I'm talking to these folks. But I'm in this sort of Shonda Rhimes year of guest bullshit because I'm going through my midlife crisis. So I'm like, yeah, great. I will go up and we'll meet. And he goes, great, I'm going to invite my wife, Heather, who's also a professor up here. And so I go into the office, and I'm pitching my ideas around improvisation. Eugene could care less. He's just checking emails. But Heather is locked in. And Heather says to me, after I finish talking, Kelly, we're both behavioral scientists. We have decades and decades of research that show us that people make bad decisions for themselves. You have an art form and a practice that would allow people to make better decisions for themselves. Those two things have never been put together before. Heather's boss at the time at the Center for Decision Research at the University of Chicago was Richard Thaler, who won the Nobel Prize in economics. And he greenlit a program that ran for about 6 years called the Second Science Project, where we looked at behavioral science through the lens of improvisation. So this is why I'm here. I'm here to talk to you about my experience at Second City in improvisation, but also all the stuff I'm talking about has science underneath it. It all has evidence that speaks to it. And so that's what we're going to talk about. And I'm going to kind of make you improvise, okay? Is that all right? Yeah, okay. Before we do that, I host a podcast. It's called Getting to Yes and it's for Second City and WGN Radio in Chicago. And I was looking back, because I interview a lot of people on culture, and I know that's what we're talking about today. And so I just wrote down a couple of like really nice things that I thought would be interesting. Marcus Collins, who used to be with Wieden and Kennedy, the advertising firm, he has a book called For the Culture that just came out. And he says, quote, culture is our everyday life. He also says culture and cults share a lot in common. And he says, quote, our beliefs are exercised by the artifacts we employ, the behaviors that we normalize, the language that we use, and all the other forms of cultural practice that are incorporated into our daily lives. Melissa Daimler, who is the Chief Learning Officer at Udemy, and she has a book called Reculturing. She says, culture is happening right now, whether by design or by default. And she says, quote, I have always thought that instead of eating strategy, culture and strategy need to eat breakfast together, maybe even lunch and an occasional dinner. Frances Fry and Ann Morris, they have a new book, but this quote is from their last book, which is called Unleashed. And she writes, they write, we believe the future of work depends on our willingness to exchange the gift of each other's transformation. Love that. They have a new book called Move Fast and Fix Things. Literally today, that podcast just dropped. And in it, they talk about leadership essentially as imperfect human beings leading other imperfect human beings. And so I give these talks a lot to a lot of different kinds of companies. I was just at the Gates Foundation last week. And I've been doing a thing where I ask people to raise their hand if they work at a place they would call functional. 0. I have yet to have anyone raise a hand with that. And I don't work at a place I'd call functional. I think Second City's structure is brilliant. I think when it comes to the stage work and the way we do that, that actually is functional, but there's more than just the stage work. And I often say we're like doctors who smoke, that we have all the answers and we know how to utilize them in terms of this like group of 6 people that put on these amazing shows and have been doing that for 65 years. But you move that upstairs to the office and, you know, it's okay, but it's not always great. So this all starts with this idea around yes and. And I know it's almost like a bumper sticker now. People have heard this, you know, the concept of yes and. I think the best thing to do is I'd like you to do it, experience it, all right? So this is gonna be our first exercise, and this is done both in the room and for our virtual audience. Hardest part of the exercise is the first thing. Not for the virtual people, they're gonna be put in breakout rooms. You have to decide who is person A and person B, and if it's a odd number in the group, you can have a C as well. So this is done in duos or triads, all right? So I'm gonna ask you to do that. This is the hardest part of the exercise. Who's A, who's B, and who's potentially C? I'll give you a second.
Okay, JT, I think you can go ahead and put us in 2s and 3s.
Feel. Awful. Fun? All right, you have a problem. Energetic. How about person B? How'd that feel for you? Great. Okay. Something deeply wrong here. I heard awkward. Yeah, I got it. Okay. So now we're going to move to person B. All right, and your job is going to be pitching your ideas for this reunion party. And person A or person C, you're going to respond to every idea with the words yes, but. Okay? Go.
Okay, does everyone understand the instructions?
No.
No.
So, Ed was supposed to be union initially. And then
Mary, you're
person
breaking
B,
up.
okay.
Maybe mute the main room.
Okay, yeah. First, mute the main room.
All right.
It seems like this is really fast too.
Yeah, it's.
For us to keep going and have the breakout.
I agree. I think what we should do is just have us and JT. Can you just take the room out for a minute? Yeah. Can everybody hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, good. So here's the thing. Person A was supposed to pitch to person B the ideas for having a reunion. Then person B is supposed to say yes, but, and then pitch their ideas to pitch to respond to.
Okay.
So I think we can
by
just
a show
stay
of
together as a
hands,
group.
by a show of hands, how many people thought that was better?
He's going too fast.
How many people thought it was worse? That's about, I'm going to say roughly an even split for the folks who are virtual. Here's the deal with this. You heard yes, but what you actually got was no with a top hat. That was not a yes. You heard the yes, but it was not there. It was no with a bow tie. Okay, so for the third round, person A and or C, you're going to pitch your idea. And what everyone's going to do is say yes and. They're going to affirm and contribute to the ideas. So also know about this. For this idea, budget is whatever you want it to be. The laws of physics do not need to be heeded. Okay? Truly. And I hope we've got a microphone for afterwards because I want to ask folks about what they come up with. But really, you're going to yes and every idea. I'm going to give you more than a minute for this so you can really dig into it. But take this as far as you possibly can or want to. There are no limits. You hearing me? No limits. Go.
JT, yeah. And then can you put us in gallery view?
All right. So
We might
Basically,
have to do that locally.
oh, okay. Never mind. Okay. So you guys, everybody can hear me, right? Okay, great. So the idea for this was to start out by presenting ideas. Then the person who you're talking with comes back to you by saying, yes, but, and comes up with another set of ideas, which as Kelly's saying, that's like no with the top hat. And now he's trying to illustrate the difference between yes, but and yes, and. So the difference between saying but or saying and, using a different conjunction. And so what he's trying to illustrate is that collaboration is likely to go a lot better if you use and rather than but, and you're likely to come up with better ideas. Did anybody get a chance to talk at all in the breakout room or no?
Yeah, we did.
Not really.
Michelle did for
Who's
20
that?
seconds.
Well, I mean, we threw out an idea, which was we should have a reunion because, like Tom Martin had said, wouldn't it be great in a year to come back and talk about AI and all the advances that have taken place? That would be really important for us to get back together and convene for that reason.
3, 2, 1, come back to me, please.
Yes, and we should do it in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Okay. Who wants to share
Thank you,
their
Susan.
yes and for the reunion? Right over here. Do we have someone with a mic? Here we go.
So Frank Tramble, we have decided that our reunion is going to take place actually, in the Space Needle. Okay, so we're gonna all go to that needle there. We're gonna head up there. There's an outside walk, so we're gonna start out there, and then for the adventurous folks, we're gonna be able to rappel down. And for those who really want, since we're we thought global was a little too small, so we thought extraterrestrial. Let's go farther.
Sure.
So how about we take this up to the space station and actually take a spaceship up there. And then we'll have since we work for universities, we have people who know, astrophysics and everything.
Yeah.
And so why don't we invite them up there and they can teach us things. And then essentially we'll keep going from there. So that's when we stop.
Love it. Outer space. Fantastic. Who else? Oh, right down here.
Hi, Charlene Wheelis. So we decided that we were going to have a Cirque du Soleil themed reunion, and that we would have Cirque du Soleil dancers everywhere, and we would have people hanging upside down in the entryway, pouring everybody a glass of champagne as they came in,
Nice.
so that we could have a toast at the very beginning, and then we would have people going throughout the attendees, the participants, doing acrobatics, and then we would have some people we'd end up with Roger Bolton doing, on the trapeze. That's what it was. So that's what we decided.
Awesome. Love it.
These are all great ideas, but I feel like they're a little limited. Jason from History Factory, Brett from Wake Forest. We're taking this thing on the road, okay? So we're actually going to hitch our tour with a band that's on the road, maybe U2 or the Rolling Stones. So then we have entertainment built in. We know some of you all are also musicians, so we're going to have you as the opening act. We're also, because we're going to be, I think, a month out from the presidential election, we're also going to invite the candidates to be with us so we can be solving the issue of polarization, working on all of our legislative priorities, and all of this is going to be subsidized by the Page merchandise that we're able to sell.
Oh, fantastic. All right, one more.
Okay, so that was really good, but the theme of this year's conference was to cross boundaries. So we are going to literally have no boundaries. Your idea was to go on a cruise. So we're going on a cruise. Behringer and Ventura Foods have already signed on as sponsors. I don't really remember what else. Oh, Richard Branson's going to speak. We're going to get all kinds of crazy speakers at it because it's such an incredible experience, and we're going to go country to country to country. So.
Love it. All right, this is great. So the way this works at Second City, right, is we take about 12 weeks to create a show. And the actors it's not like they are bringing in scripts. They're not allowed to bring in scripts. They're also not normally allowed to pitch ideas they've already pitched. So everything's a blank slate. So the first 4 weeks of the creative process are all yes and. They're all get every idea up, no matter what. Every dumb idea, like the dumber the better, go. Because we know great ideas come from abundance. Right, Bob Sutton at Stanford professor, his research shows that you roughly need around 2,000 ideas to get to one good one. If that sounds daunting, it really isn't, because another Stanford professor talks about the fact that we have roughly 60,000 ideas a day. 30,000 of those are repeats, so that's 30,000 ideas a day. You know, we are limiting ourselves. And I give these talks a lot to different companies, and almost invariably there's a guy, it's always a guy who's in the back who says, like, if I yes-anded every idea that came in my office, I'd get no work done. Two things I know. One is that guy's a nightmare to work with. And the second is he's misunderstanding the point because yes-and operates at the front end of creativity. It's 5 minutes at the beginning of a brainstorm. It's 4 weeks at the beginning of a process. And once you have everyone provide input, they feel listened to. So if their ideas are not like taken forward, they've had their say. They feel good about that. Because when you say no to an idea, what you're really doing is saying no to a person. And let those ideas live. And here's the deal too. This is not easy. The cast at Second City are the best improvisers in the world. They should be able to just do this automatically. One of our directors, Mick Napier, knows that that's not the case. And so he has a policy. It's a thing he does once during the process, and it's called Taboo Day. So the idea is that everyone, when they're writing a show, on one day has to bring in 3 ideas that there's no way in hell Second City will ever produce. They're too expensive, too offensive, and guess what? Half those ideas end up in the show. We limit ourselves. all right? And what limits ourselves, right? Our creativity is limited by fear, judgment of self, judgment of others. You cannot be creative. You cannot be creative if you're in judgment of self or judgment of others. All right, a lot of people conflate creativity and innovation, two different things. You can have creativity and no innovation. You can have just a lot of dumb ideas. Doesn't lead to anything. But you know what? You can't have innovation without creativity. So you need the mess. You need the mess and the muck and the ideas and all that to get to this great thing. Richard Thaler, when he first saw my wife Ann lead this exercise, he wrote a book, Nudge, and he's like, well, that's a nudge. So in behavioral economics, we know that people's default position is to say nothing or do nothing. And yes and is literally a nudge to do differently. All right? So we actually, when we started the Second Science Project, we had a meeting with all the scientists, and they said, take us through an exercise, and that's one we did. And they said, well, this is great. There's already research around gratitude and other things that can speak to why yes and works. But then they had a question, what do you do when you can't yes and someone, or you don't want to? But you need to stay inside the conversation. What do you do then? And we didn't know, and they didn't know, so they went back and looked at the literature, and we literally played around in classrooms and back at Second City with this idea. And there's a paper coming out next year on this very topic, because we've run this exercise now over 10,000 times. And what we discovered is this prompt, thank you because. Okay, and the idea is, if we need to stay in conversation with someone with whom we disagree, we are best by thanking them for the thing they just shared. So that sets up, it doesn't set off the fight or flight, part of the brain. And the because is where we find anything, no matter how small, that we do agree with in what they said. And so I want us to try this right now, right? And we can keep the stakes low. And that's what you'll find in improv exercises is, because this is about human behavior, we don't have to be talking about like nuclear energy or nuclear war. It's the same principle when we're talking about whether you like smooth or chunky peanut butter. So here's what I want you to do is stay in the groups that you're in, and you're going to find a topic that you're going to disagree on. I'm going to give you some prompts that you can use. You can use any of these. One is chunky versus smooth peanut butter, Coke versus Pepsi, cats versus dogs, beer versus wine. This is one that the scientists said, people don't disagree on this. And we said, hanging the toilet paper, roll over or roll under. People have strong opinions about this. So pick one or whatever. I'll give you a second to do that among the group, and then we're going to have I'll tell you what the next thing is. So everyone get it?
Okay. So we're going to stay in our group. JT, if you can mute the room. Okay. Toilet paper over or under?
Over. There's no yes and here.
Over.
Over.
Totally over.
Oh my God. Anybody under?
I'm on the under camp.
Okay.
We cannot be friends, Allie. I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
You're supposed to
Person
say
A,
thank you.
you are going to start with this topic, and your job and person B in the conversation and or C, you're all just going to try to convince each other. Convince each other that you're right.
Okay.
You can be civil. You don't have to be. You're just trying to convince each other. All right, we're going to do that for about a minute and a half. Go.
Okay. So here we go again. All right. So who was it that had said, was it Allie that had the
I think I'm the only one on the under camp, unless I missed the voice.
I'm with you. Allie, I'm with you under.
All right.
So thank you for sharing that. Why are you under?
I need a better argument here. I just think it's more visually appealing on the roll when it's under, because you're not seeing it, and it's less likely for the kids to have it like pull on it and then it's dragging and hanging all over the floor. I just think it's a tidier look.
Okay. And
More sanitary.
Who's got an argument for over?
You can make those little decorations when you.
Oh, right.
You can fold it neatly. It is much more visually appealing.
It's also
I was going to
easier.
say visually appealing for over. That was my main argument.
Yeah. Isn't
It hides
easier
the
to
underneath
share?
of the roll.
Yeah. It's easier to roll. It doesn't get stuck, for me. Like
Right.
you can push it like this and it comes off easier.
Isn't it easier to tear? Like if it's underneath, you could actually get like a whole room full.
I agree, Chris.
No, I
I'm
think
with
Chris,
it's
could you
on that
show us
one.
that action again?
opposite.
Boom.
Yeah.
3, 2, 1, come back to me.
Hey, back.
All right.
Good job, guys.
So that's the convincing round. That is the convincing round on these banal topics that shouldn't mean anything to us, but actually do mean something to us. Okay, so now we're gonna just change the rules very simply. Is rather than trying to convince the person across from you, just listen to them, and then when you respond, you say thank you and because. And the because is anything. I don't care how small it is that you see a value in what they said. It can be the timbre of their voice. It doesn't matter, anything. And then we'll see where the conversation goes. All right? Thank you, because. Go.
Okay. So JT, can you mute the room? Okay, awesome. So I think we kind of already did it a little bit. Do you guys think so? Like, I really appreciated those ideas. How about you guys?
There are compelling arguments both ways.
There were. I like my favorite was Molly's folding. But the under, I've always been very going under. I didn't like at all, but I didn't think about when you have little kids that it's a lot better.
Well, one of the things that I do think that I have a thank you because my sister drives me crazy. She's the only one of the family that ever did that. And thank you, Allie. Now I have some understanding of maybe why she does it.
Right. Exactly.
I think people with cats do it that way too, the book backwards. Because don't cats like they'll get after it and pull it, but they don't pull it from the back. It's harder for them to get after it.
Right.
Wait, Chris, did you just switch sides on us?
No. I'm just saying that.
Thank you because
Are we going into cats versus dogs now?
No.
Right.
Except if we did, we know dogs aren't that dumb.
I didn't know. I didn't even think about why I did it.
4, 3, 2, 1. Come back to me. Okay.
Cool.
Do we have mic runners? Who would like to share? Here's my question for you. I love it. It is always hard to get people back from this. All right, everybody. Who wants to share how that was different? How the two aspects of that were different? Over here.
I will admit, I'm Sarah Feldner from Marquette University. I will admit, I ran out of ideas, but just knowing he was going to say thank you, like I even felt my voice change. Like I didn't have to dig in. I wasn't trying to be real funny or real clever because I knew he was going to find something good. And so I came up, I was like, I have nothing else to say, but I was able to come up with something different. So I was just thinking, if you know that person is going to be there, how many more ideas might loosen up because you're not already defensive before you start based on patterns.
So what's interesting about that is because the behavior you're talking about is someone who's respectful, someone who's trusting, right? And judgment has been removed. So then what happens? Everyone feels better and you can get to interesting ideas. Who else wants to share? One more?
So I think with our group, I knew the yes was going to come, so I got more outrageous by what I said.
I love it.
So we were talking, I had to convince them that cats are better than dogs. And I just was, I felt the creativity boundless because I knew there was no way they were going to say no to me. So
that's great.
So we got pretty vulgar anyway.
That's fine. There's a place for that. So the way I had to utilize this, our daughter came sick, and this is years ago, and she had one of her best friend's parents were anti-vaxxers, and this is before it became fashionable. And they were very close, and so I was like, talking to my wife, I'm like, Ann, what do we do? And I'm like, thank you because. So I got in this conversation with them, and I said, thank you. Because you care for your daughter so much you don't want her hurt by vaccines. I care for my daughter so much that I don't want her hurt by someone who's not vaccinated. We care about the same thing. We care about the most important thing. And the kids found ways to, Facebook message and text and do all the other things. And so the way this ties into, there's 3 improv principles I wrote down that I feel like this ties into. One is this idea of the need to replace blame with curiosity. you know? We're quick with blame. A better way to walk through the world is one in which you are curious. Why'd you say that? And it also defangs people, right? My friend Liz Joint Sandberg was messing around with stand-up, and she had this heckler, and she worked on some of this stuff with us, and she's like, curious why you're heckling. And this guy, like, and just like went in like, I'm curious about this. Where you come from? Why are you doing this? Guy was completely disarmed. And she took the power in that situation. It was really interesting. Another idea from improv is the idea that we need to bring a brick, not a cathedral. When we come into these conversations, a lot of us walk in with our cathedral fully built. And nothing quite works like that. What about just starting with a brick? That's a very yes and idea as well. And finally, this idea that recognizing that all of us are better than one of us. I think you've heard of, and if you don't know, there is just scads of research about the best teams are diverse teams. And that is when people feel free to speak up. And that's also, you know, what psychological safety is. You've heard the term psychological safety, right? Yeah, Amy Edmondson, the Harvard professor. And you probably know it from Google's Project Aristotle, where they did a 3-year study about what made for the most effective teams. And psychological safety was number one, the idea that people feel free to speak up, even if they're the only one who feels that way. I don't know if you know the origin story of that, which was when Amy Edmondson was a postdoc at Harvard. Her boss was working with this local hospital in Boston, and they were observing these pods of nurses, different nursing teams. And the research that was coming back from their study was not what they expected. They were studying nursing teams that they felt were basically dysfunctional and others that were functional. And what the data was showing was that the dysfunctional teams made less mistakes. And so the idea there, which is not what her boss, Richard Hagen, or her thought, which is, oh, you need to be respectful, you need to, you know, do all these things to get people to really cry. Maybe you need to be yelling at each other, was what was coming back. But Amy was like, that doesn't seem right. And so she asked if they could have an impartial observer come in and observe the nursing pods. They didn't tell them this person what the study was about. They were there to sort of write down what they saw. And what came back was fascinating, and it led to this idea of psychological safety, which was that it wasn't that the dysfunctional nursing pods made less mistakes. They reported less mistakes, right? And it wasn't that the functional teams made more mistakes, they reported more mistakes. We learn through our failures. We don't learn from our successes. No one is interested in my success. You want my fiasco. That is what you want. And that is what we learn from. And we make mistakes all the time. And you're in communication, and we work with the scientist Nick Epley at the University of Chicago, and this is the area that he studies, which is that we don't get it right the majority of the time. His research shows roughly 30%, maybe 20% of the time we get it right. And a lot of people are shocked by that. But when you just think of averages, you shouldn't be. So if you like Major League Baseball, like I do, if you're missing the ball as a hitter 70% of the time, you're a 300 hitter. You're a top hitter. Epley's got this great joke. He's got a book called Mind Wise, which I highly recommend. And he has a joke that is at the beginning of the book, which is a man walks up to a riverbed, and he sees a man on the other side, and he yells, "How do I get to the other side of the river?" And the man yells back, "You are on the other side of the river." This is where we're at. This is where we're at as human beings. We get it wrong. So with Epley's work, part of what he showed us is that one of the reasons we get it wrong a lot is because human beings are reluctant to self-disclose. And again, this surprises people, but it doesn't always, because a lot of times it's that like, I'm not going to say this thing. I'm just not going to say it. And it's not just like revealing big truths. We are reluctant just to talk to people. He did a study where he sent all these graduate students onto buses and L trains in Chicago to strike up conversations with strangers. And the preliminary part of it was asking the grad students how comfortable or uncomfortable they thought these encounters would be. Overwhelmingly, they thought they'd be incredibly uncomfortable. And then when they came back, they said, what happened? They're like, it was great. I had a totally interesting conversation, went to coffee with this one person. You know, it was that. And so we were preparing to do an executive education program, And Nick said, could you create an improv exercise out of this idea? And so my wife Ann created an exercise, and I want you guys to do it with me now. We'll stay in the same groups. It's called Universal Unique. And so we're going to pick a banal topic that we'll all do, which is grocery shopping. All right, we all go grocery shopping. And so person A, you're going to start by just explaining how human beings grocery shop. You know, you get in the car, you go to the store, that sort of thing. Just how human beings, humanity, grocery shops. We're going to do that for a minute. Ready? Person A, go.
Okay, everybody, how do human beings grocery shop? And JT,
make your grocery list.
Yeah, it's probably two schools of thought. Either you have a list or you don't. There are people who just go in and buy stuff, and there's people who go in with a list. And probably person A, type A, are the ones who go in the full-blown list of everything they're getting, be my guess.
Chris, are you insinuating that I'm a type A?
I am like a hybrid. I have a list on my phone, but inevitably, depending on whether or not I've eaten, I could definitely go off the course on my list and get a bunch of stuff I didn't plan on getting. That happens at Trader Joe's all the time.
Chris, I'm right there with you. That's I was going to describe myself as a hybrid too. So
yeah,
that trait.
Yeah. I'm a hybrid depending on how much time I have. If I have lots of time, I just stroll through and look at what I want to look at. If I'm in a hurry and I got to get out fast.
Right, then I stick to the list. Agreed.
Part of my process is when I get to the checkout, I look at the cart and then I go put certain things back.
Really?
Oh.
Buyer's remorse? I always see that at the checkout line. You see you see ice cream sitting there, or like ho-hos or ding-dongs.
2, 1, back to me.
Okay.
Right. Now this is a simple one. So now, and you can both do this in conversation, but I want you to talk to each other about how you personally grocery shop. All right, so think about the details. Specifics are our friend. How do you personally grocery shop? Go.
Okay, well, we already did that.
Yeah. I just want to ask how many of you make your list based on where things are in the grocery store, because I'm that type A.
Whoa.
I do.
No.
Yep. I suspect it's going to be a lot.
No.
And it depends on where I'm shopping too.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah.
Because some of them you can break left, break right, and some of them automatically take you a certain way. So therefore, you have to kind of make your list based upon where you're shopping.
Right.
That's like a type Super A, Kim, if you're doing that.
Yeah.
Kim, I'm right with you. And do you shop for the things that don't need to be refrigerated and do the refrigerated items last so that
Whoa,
they stay
you're blowing my mind.
Oh man,
That's
that's funky.
Of course is the answer.
We're best friends.
Oh my God.
I'll do that. Like I'll think of which store I'm going to so that the refrigerated stuff is the last store.
Yeah.
But I've never thought about within the store doing that.
Wow.
I also don't like for anyone to pack my groceries because I pack them in the way that I'm going to put them away.
100%.
That messes up my system.
100%.
You guys would not want to live with me.
Yeah.
Who wants to share how that was different? Great. Who wants to share how that was different? Over here, please.
It's interesting because when you get specific about even something as banal as grocery shopping, you learn about a person.
Yes. Yes.
So I learned a lot about Kate.
Yeah. No.
Good. All excellent. Really good stuff.
No, this is what Seinfeld is about. It's not about nothing. It's about what we conceive of as nothingness, but is actually the daily things that we do in life, which when you examine them are kind of funny because we're all ridiculous. Yes, over here.
Yeah, I'd say also Jamie Delaplane from Vanguard. It facilitates connection.
Yep.
In sort of in the same way that the thank you but does. You're looking for some piece to connect with, and that exercise really explicitly. Here it came a bit more organically.
Yeah, it's a little bit more surprising because it's built inside a story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Tricia Stewart from Allegiant. For us, the first one was all about what they do.
Yes.
What the average person does and what's frustrating about the behavior that's not always logical or the experience that's not always great. Second one was about how we do it and the inside of the person and the drivers and the the story behind that.
I love it. So when our daughter was in the hospital, and any of you who've been through this situation, you know, you're just seeing just countless new nurses, new doctors constantly, like in the States at least, well, it's very different in the States, not in a good way. But in June of every year, it completely turns over the healthcare teams. And what we wanted to do is get them to see Nora and not Girl with Cancer. And so when new nurses or doctors would come in, I'd say, I'm Kelly, this is Ann, we've both worked at Second City for over 30 years. This is Eleanor, she also goes by Nora. We have a 100-pound Bernese mountain dog named Benchley who's an asshole. Who are you? And guess what? They told us. And at one point, I remember everyone was around Nora's hospital bed as she made all the doctors pull out their phones to show pictures of their dogs. And they all did it. And it fostered connection. And it let you be seen. And we talked about that before. People crave to be seen. And I know it's hard. It's less hard when you ask them. It is less hard when you ask them. I interviewed for the podcast a guy named Sunil Gupta, he's Sanjay's brother. And Sunil wrote an amazing book. He's got a new one. His first book was called Backable. And the idea, he was a tech entrepreneur, and he was going out for funding on his first venture and just bombed. Goose egg, nothing. He was then asked to speak at a conference in New York called FailureCon. And the next day in the New York Times, in the business section, was Sunil on stage with a big banner that said failure, where he was talking about his failure. And it spurred him on to research, like, why'd I fail? How do people become backable? He tells this amazing story in the book about this young woman who lives in a border town between Pakistan and India, and it's very poor. There's no running water, no electricity. She has a kerosene lamp. She also owns one book, and it's a biography of Henry Ford. And she's obsessed by Ford and obsessed to become an engineer. And her parents somehow save enough money to send her on a ship, first time out of India, to Oklahoma to go to university. And she graduates, and she sends a telegram. This is 1966. Sends a telegram to the Ford Motor Company seeking an interview, and they said yes, because she has an unusual name. They didn't know that she was a woman. And she shows up, and the hiring manager just looks at her and goes, oh, I'm sorry, we don't hire female engineers. And she was turning around to leave when she decided to turn back around and tell him her story about the town, no electricity, kerosene lamp, Ford, biography. And she said, I know you've never hired a female engineer, but what if you hired one today and we made history? And he did, and that was Sunil's mom. And that was the story that got him funded for the Rise app. It was the story about his family, because people they respond to your struggle. I start with the story about my son for a reason. I was so happy when you talked about your parents, because I'm just like, this is so perfect. It's like, what do we have in common? I mean, what I found out is, like, you guys all come from different places, right? We're all sons and daughters. You know, we have parents. And not all of that is great. There's Irving Yalom is a cognitive psychologist who has an incredible line that just slayed me. He said, sooner or later, you have to give up the hope for a better past. I mean, right? So in improv, we are taught to play the scene we're in, not the scene we want to be in. That's just hugely important, because you can't improvise well if you are ruminating about the past or you're living in some imaginary future. You know, this is the idea that there's some workplace that's functional, because there just isn't. There is not. We're all imperfect. That's what we're working from. And by the way, it's funny. That's the other thing. When we acknowledge these things, when we talk about our mistakes, Sunil has another great bit where he talks in the book about George Schlatter, who was a primatologist in the 50s in Africa, renowned for getting data that no one else could get. And he was at a conference, and this woman raised her hand and said, doctor, how is it that you are able to get so close to the primates and you get all this data? And he said, oh, it's easy. I don't carry a gun in my backpack. It's like, when I read this, I started going around telling everyone in the office, it's like, who has a gun in their backpack? And we're like, immediately the list is made, right? Like, I know these people are carrying guns in their backpack. It doesn't matter, right? But if you enter into a space where someone knows you don't have that, that makes all the difference in the world. Sunil's the best. We actually ended up creating a class at the Farley School for Entrepreneurship and Innovation at Northwestern, that combine, my wife and Sunil co-taught it, that combine these principles with improv. And these engineering students were just blown away because it's like they didn't ever consider themselves to be storytellers. And the reality is, especially for entrepreneurs, they need to be storytellers. When I talked to the Gates folks, the deal was last week, it was a accelerator program for 16 entrepreneurs all working in clean tech, green tech. And the next 2 days, they were pitching their ideas to Bill Gates. That's what they got to do. And they weren't clear with me on this, that this is what was happening, but I was able to pivot and really give them a number of these ideas around specifics. I also gave them this exercise that we do, which is a good one for anyone. It's called 60-30-10. So the idea is we have you tell me who you are in 60 seconds. Now tell me in 30, now tell me in 10. And maybe we add a hashtag on there. And we were doing this exercise in Washington once, and Ash Carter, the late Secretary of Defense, his wife was in the workshop, and she goes, "Oh, that's how you have to talk to Obama in the Oval. You have to be able to have your 60-30-10 depending on time, and what they want to get from you." But really, when you do the 10, it's like, okay, what's the important thing here? And again, yes and is all about doing this, right? But then we also sometimes need to get to this sort of brevity. I had a playwriting teacher who once told me, you don't have a play unless you can tell me what it is in one sentence. And I have to title a lot of things at Second City, and I come up with a lot of new shows. And when you're coming up with original material, you have to figure out, like, okay, how do I say this? How do I express this, like in 4, 5, 6 words, that it's funny, that it's interactive, that someone's going to want to see it? And that is not easy, but that does require you to both think big, zoom out, and think small, zoom in. Ron Heifetz is a Harvard leadership professor who talks about leadership as being the need to both be on the dance floor and in the balcony and go back and forth. You don't stay one place. And he says also that if your boss has the desk that is farthest away from where the business is going, probably a bad boss. And from my side, people make fun of me at Second City for years because, like, they call me the town crier because I'm constantly going and sharing with people things that are going on or ideas just because I can't help myself. But what that does is also create open, transparent communication. People know what's going on. So in a couple of minutes, I'm going to take your questions. But before we do that, there was one more story I wanted to tell you, and this was a guy who was on my podcast. His name is Sanford Greenberg, and he was a very accomplished philanthropist. And he wrote his memoir. It's an amazing story. So Sanford, his family fled the Holocaust, and they ended up in upstate New York, just outside Buffalo. And he was star student, star athlete, pitcher for the baseball team, got the girl, all that, and got a scholarship to Columbia University. And this is right around when Second City started, so 59, that time. And he was having trouble with his eyesight. And then his sophomore year, he just went blind one day. And he went home, and he had been seeing this doctor, and there was nothing they could do. The doctor in Buffalo had actually given him prescriptions that were worse for his eyes, and he never regained his sight. And he was going to quit school because in those days, if you were blind, you pretty much had 2 options, which was like small town judge, or you could cane chairs. And I've literally looked this up, and that was true at that time. That's like kind of what you did. His roommate, Arthur, who he had met at school, came back and berated him into coming back, and his girlfriend, who was all at Columbia. So he ends up going back, and he realizes he needs to tape his lectures, and he's got this reel-to-reel thing that he's carrying around, and he's recognizing if I can make this go faster, it wouldn't take so long to transcribe everything that I'm learning. So he kind of invented this place to compress sound. When he graduated, he sold that for over $1 million. His friend Arthur, his roommate, was also helping him, taking him to classes. And he did pretty well for the year, and then they come back the next year. And he had an appointment with a social worker, and he said to Arthur, "All right, can you take me?" He goes, "Yep, I got you." So he took him downtown, New York, and Sanford finishes with his session, comes out, And he's like, all right, I gotta get back to campus. And Arthur goes, oh, I'm sorry. He was an architectural student at the time. He's like, I've got to go draw this building. I forgot about that. So why don't you come with me? And he's like, oh, I can't miss my class. And Arthur's like, I can't take you back. And then Sanford's like, I'll just do it myself. And here's the thing about Sanford, you can't tell he's blind, that, like, even today. And he didn't wear glasses and he didn't carry a cane, any of that. It was just maybe a source of pride with him, whatever. So then he starts to try to go back to campus. And he steps into traffic and someone pulls him out. And he falls down the stairs to the subway, someone picks him up. He gets on the, he is bloodied and bruised. It takes him 3 hours. He gets to the gates at Columbia University. He takes this breath and he hears a voice behind him say, I knew you could make it. And that was Arthur, who didn't continue studying architecture. He went to music. His name's Art Garfunkel. So it was, and that was his partner who helped him through this. And Sanford's got a great line that he says, because this is about the importance of trust. He says, people without sight have a special reverence for trust. And I asked him how many times he felt he had his trust betrayed. And he said 2 or 3 at most. That's amazing, right? And I think, so much of the work we do is around framing, and life isn't easy. Life's very hard. And I think most of us know we're adults here, right? They don't tell us this. We always assume it's going to get easier. And I'm like, no, actually it doesn't. You actually have coping mechanisms and other things and relationships and all those other things to hopefully make it better. It doesn't get easier. So this idea that you can frame your life within trust and possibility and vision and all of that. One line that I love, I was interviewing Dan Pink, and he loves improv. He studied at Northwestern, so he's very familiar with Second City. And Carl Weick is one of the few scientists, academics who actually have studied improvisation. And Weick has this line. He says, you got to learn to fight like you're right, but listen like you're wrong. Fight like you're right and listen like you're wrong. I am ready to take some questions. And I'm happy to tell Tina Fey stories. Yeah.
Hi, Kelly. Jason Tressel from History Factory. Thank you for everything you're sharing with us today. You shared we learn from mistakes.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you have any tips on how you help people and organizations become more comfortable doing that. We all work for organizations that can often be quite uncomfortable with being that vulnerable.
Yeah. So there's the behaviors and there's the systems. Systems are harder than the behaviors, but the systems are created through the behaviors. So there's an exercise that we often do, especially in our beginning classes, called 1001. It's kind of a stand-up exercise. And there's a format for telling a stand-up joke. So the audience will give you an object like, calendars. You'll say 1001 calendars, walk into a bar, the bartender says, we don't serve your kind here, and the calendars say, on this day you do, on this week you do, whatever, some stupid joke like that. The job of everyone is to clap like crazy and just what it is, the funniest thing you've ever heard. That's the job. And you just keep going up and doing this stuff. And even if you just crap the bed, everyone has to applaud. But what happens about halfway through that exercise is the jokes get better. Because you have this incredible support system. Again, you get that fear out of you, because it doesn't matter what you say. It's probably going to suck. That's okay. And it's just okay. And the jokes get better. And maybe not for everyone. Not everyone, that's their thing. But then it's okay also, because that's not their job. We've all heard this phrase, your team is only as good as its weakest member. In our work, we actually don't like that. We say your team is only as good as its ability to compensate for its weakest member, because one of us is going to be the weakest member at some given time. Like, the big joke at Second City is like, do not let Kelly touch anything technical. But if you want me to order a good wine, I gotcha. I mean, we all have the different things there's the diversity of the teams. So creating, we call them ensembles at Second City, creating these ensembles sort of are ways of seeing people, seeing what they're good at, promoting what they're good at, and then allowing for the mistakes to happen. We also, some companies do like failure awards at the end of the year. What are the most awesome failures you've ever had? I have a whole section in my book, which is about, I have produced so many terrible shows. that have just been, I thought, well, the Canadian contingent here will get this. I worked really hard to get the stage rights for the 1970s hockey movie Slapshot, assuming that in Canada, people would be just all over coming to the show, and forgetting that mostly women buy theater tickets, and those women were sick and tired of seeing hockey or literally going to the theater to see anything about hockey. And one of the mistakes I made with that was simply not asking enough people whether it was a good idea. I stayed in my little group, bunch of white men who love that movie, which is not worn well. It's so incredibly misogynistic. And I could have saved money, time, all that stuff if I had just, gone to people. Now, that being said, I have a story that I can share as part of a book and in a talk or whatever. So that's the other things, like what I learned from that. Well, I learned that. So making and here's the deal too, it's very rare that any of us are gonna have the power to do this, complete business-wise. Just start with your team. One of the things my wife has had to do sort of in the contemporary world of education, she's a tenured professor of comedy. She runs the first ever BA in comedy writing and performance. She has every parent's nightmare. A.D. Bryant was one of her first students. But she started doing a thing with her students that she now does with the actors that she works with as a director, which is they simply make covenants at the beginning of the first class. So it's like, what's important to us? Let's decide what's important to us as a group. These are the covenants we're going to behave by. If someone breaks, if something else happens outside of that, we can discuss it, but you can't shut everything down, and we have to listen to each other, and we have these agreements, and that really helps things not escalate. Professor Heidi Brooks at Yale does a really interesting thing on her first day of class, which is she hands out pieces of paper, and she says, don't put your name on this, but write down some pain you're feeling right now. And then she reads out the pieces of paper. And that creates this shared empathy and all this reality that we're all going through stuff. We're literally all going through stuff. I hope that answers something close. Okay, sure. Anyone else? I mean, seriously, I got good stories. I'll do Tina, and then we'll hit up over here. Okay, Tina's great. One of the things that people don't know, and this is kind of a leadership story, in the 1990s, when Tina was on stage at Second City, if you look at any pictures from no one was paying attention to Tina Fey. No one knew her name, but there was someone on stage that people literally came to Second City to see. Any guesses? No, but they did do that. He was the decade before. No, it was Rachel Dratch. Rachel Dratch was a bona fide star in Chicago. Everyone was certain she was going to get hired by Saturday Night Live. Saturday Night Live comes in over the summer, as they always do. Rachel and Tina both get flown out. Tina gets hired on the writing staff. Rachel does not get hired. All right. So the deal back in those days, it's not true now, but the deal back in those days in SNL is once you were auditioned and not hired, you could never audition again. That used to be the rule. Again, it's not now, but it was for many years. So Rachel comes back. It's like, well, what am I going to do? And she had already left the job of the Second City main stage where she was. And this is the thing about Tina is a leader, but she doesn't lead command and control. She leads often from behind or underneath. And so what she did was she knows that Lorne Michaels and the producing staff at Saturday Night Live come every summer to Second City to scout talent. Tina, after her first year, she was given the head writing job from Adam McKay, another Second City alum. And she called me and says, hey, I want to do a two-person show with Rachel. Could we do it over the summer? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And so we have these two theaters, the main stage and the ETC. So Tuesday and Wednesday are dark. And so they put up the show there because Tina knew that Lorne Michaels was going to come to Chicago and he couldn't not see the show with his head writer. So he comes to that show and he hires Rachel on the spot. That's Tina. And it's not like she doesn't ask for accolades. I mean, she's just that person. She also does this. I mean, it's also, I produced a benefit show for her in New York. It was for her kid's school. And I only reflected on this later. I'm like, this is classic Tina, which is like, I had set the running order of scenes and she came up to me and she's like, I've got to forget it. And I go, no, what was your idea? She's like, I was thinking this other piece could go first, but you're probably right that it should be the way it is. I'm like, no, we'll switch it. It's fine. And I realized like, oh no, she totally knew it was the right thing to do. She wasn't going to tell me to do it. And she could have. It was like her dime. But she just finds that in a way to make you feel fine and make you feel like you're part of the decision. She's the best. Okay.
Give Tina Fey and politics. We've had a long 3 days of conversations around overcoming borders and barriers and getting people to work together and the polarization that's going on.
Yeah.
Why are politics so unfunny, except on television?
Are they unfunny? There's a lot to unpack there. I get the political question all the time. People are always like, can you go to Hollywood to do this? Or can you go to Washington to do this? I think that comedy, Trump is funny. I don't, he's not my cup of tea. And just because he's, Nir Eyal is a writer who says that it's not a superpower unless it can be used for evil. There are people who use comedy to separate us. There are other people who use comedy to bring us together. My wife has a theory about this. She's got a book coming out next year, her comedy theory book, and she talks about the difference between improv and stand-up, that improvisers do perspective taking. You give me a suggestion, I'll bring it back to you and try to like do it in the way that, you know, what your intent was. Stand-ups are different. They have to do perspective giving, and they need to do it in the first 5 minutes of their act, which is how are you gonna watch me? And think about your favorite stand-up and their early, like their first special that you saw, they always start with something that's wrong with themselves. Patton Oswalt's a schlub, Amy Schumer's a slut, John Mulaney's a drunk, I could keep going on. Every one of them. That's perspective giving. And like we talked about before with the sort of storytelling aspect of starting with a struggle, that's what they're doing for buy-in. So I think one of the problems you've got in the political sphere is first off, the incentives suck. So they all should be paid more, and there should all be term limits and all these things that are nudges towards not having to play zero-sum game. It's the system's bad. So like you can yes and all you want, but if you don't have a prevailing system that is going to help support this stuff, again, teams, you're probably okay. But then it gets outside of that, and really with Washington, we need all of them sort of working together. So the incentives are bad, and that doesn't, I mean, this is the tough thing. I mean, like, it's hard enough when everything's fine. It's hard enough when everything's fine, and then when it's not, you know, what happens? And I'm amazed by certain, you know, even in my own state in Illinois, like during COVID, there was some great behavior and there was some great listening, and there was the opposite as well, which is always going to be the case. But yeah, if I could solve the political issue, I think I'd be a millionaire, which I'm not. Any other questions before we finish up? Virtual question. Yeah, please. What you got?
Hi, Kelly. I'm Molly Rousey with Gagin McDonald's. I think you touched on this earlier, and this is a much easier question than Brian's. But it seems like busyness is one of the things that really gets in our way of creativity and innovation and those connections that you were talking about. Do you have ideas when we're on back-to-back Zoom calls all day, how to infuse some of your thinking and great ideas to make people feel included using some of these techniques, but doing it in a way that works with our current schedules?
Wow. That's not an easy question, actually. Oh. There's a few things I have done for myself. First of all, I had an efficiency expert on the podcast, and so I unsubscribed from everything. So the first thing I did on email is I unsubscribed from everything. I love Lou Malnati's Pizza in Chicago. That doesn't mean I need to get the newsletter. I already know I love it. But I unsubscribed for everything. And I also deleted every single email until I was down to 20. And I keep it that way. Because we're creating an iceberg. And it's not just that we can't see it, because we know it's there. We know it's there. So physically there's things that you can do in terms of your own tech and other stuff. I think in the virtual formats, in the sort of Zoom world, when we started pivoting to doing those online workshops, we recognized that people are sitting inside like a box. And so we encourage movement, and we have people play with environment. And so it's like there's ways in which your personality can come through here. And I'll leave you with this. There's an exercise. So COVID happens. We're at home. I need to help the team come up with a resilience exercise for a major soft drink company. And so I said to my wife, Ann, I'm like, do you have any resilience exercises? She goes, yeah. I just did one for a class. So I had everyone get a piece of paper, and we had them make 3 columns. In the first column, they write down the exercise called wish. In the first column, they write down a wish that they had that they couldn't do. So I put down swim in salt water because I was not traveling anywhere. Second column, you write down the emotion you'd feel if you were granted that wish. So I wrote down refreshed. In the third column, you write down something you could do right now to experience that emotion. So I wrote down put water on my face, go for a run. We have no agency over things that are happening to us. We have agency over our emotional response to them. And it's not easy, so we need to practice. All of what I'm talking about, all this stuff is practice. You need to practice the behaviors that you want to exhibit. And that is sometimes very little. It's sometimes having that story with the person next to you who's a stranger, and sometimes it's the bigger stuff as well. Thank you so much, everyone.